Okay, welcome everyone to SIG Apps. My name is Adnan Abdul Hussein, and today is the 2nd of December. So this is our first meeting back from KubeCon. We have Matt Farina and Janet who are on as co-hosts. And we don't have any announcements today, so we'll jump right into the discussion. So the first thing here is the data protection working group. So Xing and Dave, are you on to take this?
Yeah, sure. Can you show the screen? I added a link there.
Yeah, I'll share it.
Can you, I'm not sure if the screen is shared now.
It's not yet, hold on.
Okay.
Are you sharing it, Dave? Or?
Yeah, let me.
The link is there.
I have the link.
It's in the agenda. Okay.
It's okay.
In the
I
agenda.
have it. Let me bring it up.
Okay.
And where to go? Desktop 2, desktop 3. Nah, got too many things on my desktop.
Mm-hmm.
Let me try that again.
Or Adnan, you can just go to the agenda and click that link. Okay, great. Okay.
I think that's it.
All right.
Everybody seeing the data protection working group slide?
Yeah, we can see that. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, so we can see that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we talked about this during KubeCon. We talked to some backup vendors about this, and they are interested. There are also lots of discussions on this subject at KubeCon. It happened during the SIG Storage face-to-face meetup and several breakout sessions. So now that volume snapshot support is going beta in 1.17, it's a good time to look at what are the other functionalities that are missing in Kubernetes so that we could provide data protection support. So we thought it's a good time to form this data protection working group to promote this feature in Kubernetes. So we listed some of the potential topics that we can discuss in this working group. Extract snapshot data without creating a new volume. Data populator refers to the ability to create a DBC from an external data source, such as a S3 object or Git repo. Retrieve diffs between two snapshots. This is very important for efficient backups. Consistency groups, the ability to take crash consistent snapshots across multiple volumes. This is something we have been discussing in SIG Storage. Application consistent snapshot. There is already a CAP by ENAN, which has been reviewed. Data protection policy, for example, the ability to set schedule for periodic backups. So this working group would be a place to promote cross-SIG collaboration, and the stakeholder SIGs will be SIG Apps and SIG Storage. I think there will be features that are developed under both SIGs. We'd like to hold regular Zoom meetings to discuss these issues. So Dave, do you have anything to add? Dave?
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. It's hiding somewhere. Yeah, so I think this is a really good time for us to start bringing this together. I think the goal here is to bring all the different stakeholders together, which currently we've got a number of DP vendors, backup vendors talking, but we also need to bring in application vendors, more of the storage vendors, and end users as well to see what needs there are.
Okay, great. The Shan is also there. You want to add anything? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone have any questions on this or thoughts on this? And is anyone interested in getting involved as well?
So this is Neeraj Tolia from Caston. We've been in previous conversations with Jing, Dave, etc. And given the fact that we do work on this for Kubernetes, I think this is actually a good idea versus vendors doing one-offs or doing something very customer specific to just their products. So I would be in favor of this.
So this is John Terpstra from Dell. I'm very much in favor of the direction that this is taking. My team in Dell does not directly write data protection code, but I will seek to engage our data protection team in where appropriate and in the area where it makes sense.
So this is Sukarna from Dell Data Protection Team. Yeah, I echo what Neeraj and John said.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think as next steps, we need to put together a charter for the working group and then present that to the Kubernetes dev mailing list.
Yeah, sure. I think I also like to bring this up in the SIG storage meeting as well, because this is like a cross SIG effort.
Yeah,
It's actually the meeting is on Thursday, I think.
Okay, great. So anyone who's interested in this and wants to get involved, I suggest going along to that meeting, SIG storage meeting on Thursday as well. And then
Xing, could you perhaps forward the meeting URL and timing or the invitation for that to make sure that everyone on this call has a copy of that?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
And can you guys hear me? This is Shan Chen from Google.
Hi, yes, yeah, couldn't hear you earlier.
Okay, sorry. I was being mute probably. I think one small thing I would like to add on top of that, with regarding to data protection, is that with the cross SIGs cooperation, I don't think we have a clear agenda yet.
Wait, I'm sorry?
In terms of prioritize how things should be prioritized. For example, in the early stage, what type of stuff do we need involvement from SIG apps, and what type of involvement do we need from SIG storage? I think this we need to work out a little bit more.
Yeah, so that's something that we need to discuss in the working group.
For example, exactly, and for example, execution hooks probably is a good topic to start with, something like that.
Yeah, we actually have a
actually,
plan to go ahead and start with the incremental backups. I really want to take a holistic view of this because there's, the DP space is kind of large, and I think we need to kind of go top down as far as what it is exactly what problems are we actually solving for people, and making sure that it all fits together, because we've kind of been doing this piece by piece, and I'm not sure all the pieces actually fit at this point.
That's exactly my point. If the topic is so big to start with, right? Do we want to selectively choose some topics to start with first, or rather, as you mentioned, top down and try to do some analyzing within the working group? What exactly is the goal of the working group?
So that's one of the goals of the working group, to figure out what the working group does. But I would say that, we should have an overview of where we want to go and get this down to, a relatively small number of things. And then start picking individual areas that we can get done.
Yeah, I'm all for it, right? First of all, don't get me wrong. It just for me, it's like since we're getting started, and we have I think Xin and Dave, you two has involved with a lot of discussions, me as well, during KubeCon, and we collect a whole bunch of positive feedback, and people want this. But what I'm afraid of is this thing. It's really, as you mentioned, is really a big topic, right? Having the working group focus on this probably is the best thing to do at the beginning.
You mean focusing on what exactly the topic is? I agree.
Yeah, figure out what exactly we are solving, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and this will be part of the requirements of forming the working group. So one thing that's interesting about working groups is that generally they need to have an exit effectively. So some goals that will need to be reached, and and so as part as coming up with the charter, we need to define what those goals would be for the working group to be disbanded in the future. So what goals do we want to get to?
Well, one feedback I kind of have is that maybe for goals actually start a little more broad, right? I mean, ultimately, like, you have a list of potential topics that you want to include, but you don't want to limit yourself to. All of them kind of fall in the same space, saying that we want to work in this space, and as a first effort, we want to outline kind of the exact features we think we want to build, or the direction we want to take, or what we think is most important, and have that be step one, and then go and then take each one and try to come up with a timeline of how you want to address them in order. It sounds like a reasonable approach to me.
Yeah, I think at this point, one of the challenges is just getting the people involved that should be involved with this, because I think there's a lot of people outside the Kubernetes community who are starting to become part of the Kubernetes community, but aren't really there yet. So that's kind of the first challenge, is having a structure where we can actually organize people and say, hey, you know, let's talk about this. So that's one of the first goals of the working group, is just to have some form of an organized structure so we can invite people and say, hey, please join us and bring your input.
So I just want to mention that the potential topics listed here, a lot of those have already been discussed, right? So if you look at the consistency groups, that's already design in progress, application consistent snapshot, there's already a cap on that. Data populator, that's also something that has already been brought up. We just want to go back and talk about that again. So it's not like everything here are brand new topics, but of course there are a lot of things we want to do. We definitely need to prioritize. We can't avoid the ocean, right? So we need to find something we can really complete, we can really accomplish, and focus on that.
Right. I mean, my feedback was kind of like, maybe, so instead of focusing on just what you can complete, focus on what's addressed, what's not addressed, and what's most important to the end user, and then start. And then from there, I think what we want to do, and the priority of that work will kind of flow out of it. You know, kind of, it's not necessarily about like tying up things that have already been done and like just identifying the gaps, as much as telling the whole story about this is what we think needs to happen for data protection in the domain of container orchestration, particularly as it pertains to Kubernetes. Here are the gaps that affect end users of the system, and we should get together and address these gaps because they're the most important.
Yeah, sounds good.
That sounds great. So I guess we will go ahead and we'll talk about this some more at the SIG storage meeting. And I'll put together a mailing list and start inviting people to join it. And we'll work on a charter, and we'll schedule an initial meeting of the working group. I think we can just go ahead and start scheduling working group meetings even before we have like the official charter, right?
Yeah, we can definitely have our own meetings. I think that should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, the general consensus has been that nobody can stop you from having a meeting, right? Like, everyone's free
God,
to
I
do
wish
that.
somebody could stop a meeting. Oh, I wish.
Well, with that being said, like the thing about having a sponsored working group, you just want to, if you're going to go through the process to start one, you just might want to outline why you think this needs to happen as a working group. And I think one of the things that's first on the slide, that basically you want to do some work across SIGs that may affect built-in controllers and in-tree APIs, it would be a good reason to, like, that collaboration and that necessity would be a good and germane reason to start a working group that's a SIG sponsored one. And my other question is, do we have any of the co-chairs of SIG storage on?
Assad is not, I don't think he's on.
Okay. It excuse me. Has anybody run this by Saad yet?
So he's aware that we are working on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a couple of discussions. Again, this is Shang from Google. We work closely on SIG storage. I think the reason why I put my initial view out is Shin literally lists a lot of projects over here. I think her major goal over here is to get people aware of this thing going, and also they are pieces we do need from SIG apps to make the whole data protection thing happening, right? I totally get the previous feedback about figuring out the gaps and list those gaps and then bring people together. That's probably the best approach I can think of. Shin and I will continue to work on this, and Dave as well. In terms of SIG storage, we had a couple of discussions around this topic as well. As I mentioned before, this has been discussed heavily during KubeCon as well as offline. So go ahead, please.
I think I was involved in some of the very early discussions around this as well. I think, yeah, like, I just wanted to make sure that, like, we're not saying, like, yeah, let's go do this, and then Saad is like, what are you guys talking about, right? So, I mean, you already have a plan to go present it at SIG Storage, and that'll be good. And then a lot of the people who are actually storage vendors and implementers of the underlying storage systems that are popular to sit underneath Kubernetes are SIG storage members primarily, right? So having their participation to get something that's actually implemented and implementable across the storage systems that we want to support is going to be kind of critical to success.
Yeah, we had a discussion in the face-to-face, the SIG storage face-to-face, where a lot of these topics were brought up. I don't think this is going to surprise anybody, and we've had offline coordination as well.
Yeah, I don't think this is a concern in terms of supervising them. And
yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, Saad was actually, he was present in a lot of those discussions, so should not be a surprise at all.
Okay, fantastic. Any last thoughts on this topic?
Do we at this time have any form of cross matrix of what is supported in the various releases of Kubernetes through CSI and by the various vendors who have CSI plugins and potentially backend storage systems? My intent in asking that question is to identify where the gaps are, where the overlaps are. If we push for a technology or a capability that no one implements, is there a likelihood that it would be implemented? Those sort of basic questions. And I'm happy come January to actually take a lead in helping to pull that together if that would help.
Yeah, so right now in Kubernetes, there's only the volume snapshot support. And then there's also a cloning support. So I think right now most drivers have supported that. So that actually is already available in the CSI docs. We have that document. So we could go through that and find all of those drivers that support snapshots. Other than that, we don't have any other features in CSI or in SIG storage that is specific for this. Everything else is still being discussed.
I pasted a link there, John. I think this is the doc that Shane was referring to.
Yeah, so I can forward that to you, and then you can take a look and see if there's anything else that you are looking for and you want to compile. But I think one thing that we would need to find out is, let's say if we want to change block tracking, right? That's probably not supported by every vendor. So that type of thing would be good to find out, which vendor supports that, which does not.
Right. I mean, if there are kind of two strategies, right? Like one is you go for, so let's assume that you're going to add extension functionality into the CSI specification, right? You can either support basically the common subset across all vendors, which makes it pretty easy to implement, but also gives you the lowest common denominator in terms of features. Or additional functionality optional. So, because what you probably don't want to do is all of a sudden make somebody non-compliant with the CSI just because their particular system doesn't implement right? So you can have like various profiles of compliance or optional features inside of the specification if you should choose to extend it, right? And that's
we're going to have to do some of that. I mean, one of the difficulties right now, so I'm on the VMware side, right? So the current Snapshot API is very much based on the cloud model, like the AWS/Google Cloud model, and it really doesn't work for the on-prem model. And so we've got to be able to support both of these. And the features we're asking for, like incremental backups, for example, that's something that the cloud providers probably aren't going to do for a little while. It's going to be a big thing for them if they even choose to support it.
But if you just look at the basic snapshot feature, that should be the same, right?
It doesn't work without the incremental backups and without like a data path. We're pretty much not working for on-prem. I mean, we've gone around all of the CSI stuff for our first implementations and backup.
Wait, were you saying that incremental snapshot is going to be a feature that will work on cloud and not work on most on-prem systems?
Vice versa.
What do you mean by incremental snapshot?
So, for example, like, so there's a major difference between, for example, a cloud snapshot and an on-prem snapshot, at least in most cases. So in the case of a cloud snapshot, such as a EBS snapshot, that's actually something you can rely on as a backup because it moves it off the primary storage and into S3 under the covers. On-prem, so for example, like in a vSphere snapshot, when we take a snapshot, that resides on the primary storage. If the primary storage is lost or the volume actually is deleted, the snapshots all go away. So snapshots are not actually backups for us.
Yeah, we're using a slightly different terminology you're using the terminology that Andrew outlined in a document that he published a while ago, where basically when you say snapshot, you don't mean actually moving it off of the physical host to highly durable storage, right? Whereas in cloud, that's pretty much what it is, right? Like if I take a snapshot, it's going to some remote storage system in most cases. So we have different terminology. For you, snapshot means I'm going to take a snapshot of the data and then I back up the snapshot in order to make it a point in time recoverable snapshot.
Right, and that's really, that's been our model for the last, 10 years. So that's part of the goal here is to bring these different viewpoints together, hash out how we can all live together and make things work.
It might also be a goal of the working group, just a suggestion to kind of solidify that terminology so that when we talk, we're all talking about the same concepts.
Yeah, so that's one of the outcomes of this. We really have to have a description of what data protection means in Kubernetes, what it means to you, for example, as a DP vendor. I have 150 backup partners at VMware. I've got to start bringing these people in and explain to them, here, do this, and you can work with Kubernetes.
Right.
And, and I can't do this one-on-one.
Right.
And Dave, I think you're kind of pointing out two things. One thing is the requirements for data protection, and the other thing is the requirements for adding incremental snapshots. And they kind of overlap in some cases, but not in every case.
That's absolutely true. So I think what we have to do is we have to have this big picture, we have to, kind of define, the different models that are happening. So for example, like, if you look at like Valero coming out of the cloud space, that really relies on the storage platform to do backup, to actually keep the persistent volume snapshots safe. Other areas may not. And so we need to kind of define the models. I think we can converge on 2 or 3, and then, decide which models people support, like in terms of the storage, and also which models people consume in terms of like DP vendors, and then what customers actually need, and we'll see what happens.
You might also want to consider that it would be ideal probably as an outcome for end users if the underlying, the model that's presented to the end user is uniform both across the cloud and across on-prem installations, right? Like, I mean, the win for a lot of people, aside from developer velocity with going to Kubernetes and containers, is workload portability. So you can't have a completely, like, it probably wouldn't be great for them if you have a completely different user experience in on-prem environments and on cloud platforms. Like, the end goal for them is going to be like, I can run the same thing anywhere. And as far as it's presented to consumers, like the actual users of the Kubernetes cluster, it's a uniform experience.
Yes, I think that's a very good goal.
But I think we need to be cognizant that while all environments might have the same APIs, the actual performance of said APIs might be very different, because a lot of these things, for efficiency and performance, you really depend on the underlying storage system. There's not much we'll be able to do at some of the API level stuff that we'll work on as a part of this group.
Yeah, but that's true for all storage features in Kubernetes,
Yep.
Right? Like, I mean, there's not much you can do to the quality of your network fabric and the underlying storage infrastructure is going to greatly affect your user experience, and we haven't solved that problem.
That is correct.
It's more than just the network infrastructure, though. I mean, it's things like, how did you actually do, for example, cloning and stuff. So I think if we start to lay these out as, here's use cases for these things, here's what the performance is going to be expected, here's what we expect, how often we expect these calls to be made, and in what circumstances, that's going to help storage vendors, for example, decide how to implement things. Like, for example, in our cloning mechanism, we'll actually do a complete clone every time. We'll copy all the bits. We did that because when we designed this thing like 4 years ago, the idea of doing a link clone was not really, we can do this, but it's weird in our system, and so we didn't. But when we start using this as the way to extract data from a snapshot, it's a requirement that we needed. If we'd known about this 2 years ago, we probably could have gone ahead and slipped some of this stuff in.
Okay, cool. So I think we have some good next steps here. Dave, if you could go and create that mailing list and then add whoever's interested, and then we can reconvene at SIG storage.
Will do.
Great. Okay, next on the list here is a topic about pod disruption budgets. Morten, are you on the call?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I had 2 items. I see Michael added a few others as well. So the first one is making it possible to configure the defaults for PDBs. Currently, there's sort of a default in that if there's no PDB, we assume that all pods can be evicted. We got a few requests also internally here at Google about being able to somehow override that. So if they should be able to say for all workloads, if there's not an explicit PDB, assume that at least one needs to always be available, or like maximum available can be 25% or something like that. There was a discussion, or there's an issue on this from a couple of years back, with a lot of back and forth on this. So I was interested if this is something we think might be worth looking at again.
Could someone repeat that, please?
Did that sound come from this end, or?
I think that was a telephone user.
Okay.
Do you hear what I said, or?
Yeah, I caught all of what you said.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yes,
Okay, so Morten, what you wanted to know was, should we consider doing something off of, and what would we do? You're looking at like maybe max unavailable or something like that inside of each of the workloads APIs, and then trying to pre-compute during eviction which pods are acceptable.
Yeah, so let's see, am I unmuted? Yeah. So I was thinking about something where it was possible to either on a per namespace or per cluster level be able to say, like, if this is the default, and maybe even on a per like group kind basis, I can say for all stateful sets in this namespace, this is the default, or I could just say for all workloads in this cluster, assume this is the default unless someone has overridden it somehow.
Okay, I didn't know we had actually, so you're talking about doing something that's like policy-based with respect to disruption.
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen anyone propose that before. I've seen some proposals for like, you know, basically if it's a deployment and there's like max and available specified, that should be respected during coordinating and draining. But I think the kind of idea was, we decided at that time that the declarative intent of the user with respect to max and available is different from that captured with pod disruption budget, and that it's okay that for those two things to be separate, and that you can specify a pod disruption budget in order to do it. I think what you're proposing is different in that you're saying, like, okay, we do have this policy mechanism for disruption tolerance, but it only works on a per workload basis, and that's cumbersome to most users. We might be able to do better and have a higher level policy mechanism that specifies general disruption tolerance for categories of workloads, potentially across specific namespaces.
Yeah, that's correct. We've gotten feedback from some people who build PaaS on top of Kubernetes, and then all users have to remember to set this pod disruption budget, otherwise they get surprised when node upgrades happen, and
yeah,
sometimes that doesn't happen and things go bad.
I mean, like, certainly I'm interested, like, so what are you looking for? Like, are you looking for us to say, like, yeah, this sounds interesting and we'd be supportive, or?
I was just looking see if there's interest. If so, I'll try to maybe write up a cap and then try to use that to get more discussion around it and how to do it. I have some thoughts on how we could do it. It's all alternative, have some drawbacks, but.
I mean, like, I can't speak for the rest of the community, but I'm interested. Like, I think it's worth writing up a cap on, because that's definitely pain that I felt before. And it's easier a lot of times if you can get like an organization of developers to start thinking about, like, here's how you deploy your workload. The less they have to do, the easier it is for the company as a whole, is what I would say, right? So if you can specify, if you can have someone or a smaller team of people who specify disruption tolerance at a general level across the system, it would probably make a lot of people's lives a lot easier and be one less thing that you have to think about.
Cool. Yeah. I'll try to follow up and try to get a cap up.
Old issue, but I read some comments from Clayton, like about replication controller or replica set of scale 1 to imply pod disruption budget seems pretty much weird. And I would be afraid this changes like the behavior that Cube had before. So backwards compatibility would be something to consider as well.
Yeah, I remember a kind of a similar conversation on that bent with replica set and stateful set size 1. But I thought the outcome there was that like, if you have something of size 1, you can't in any, like if you have one of something, just given the kind of nature of infrastructure, you can't expect high availability, right? Like you have to, you've effectively built a system that does not tolerate disruptions. So I don't know like how we can help you.
Yeah, but if you were to default the pod disruption budget for it, you would basically block any drains, right?
That's the downside, right? Like you would block any drains and cordons. Anybody who wanted to build a PaaS or any type of infrastructure as a service that provided an auto upgrade feature basically can't do anything. And then honestly, you can't upgrade your node yourself without disrupting that workload, right? So like you've built something that fundamentally doesn't tolerate even a planned disruption. There's not a lot we can do that's going to help you move forward.
Yeah, I mean, but the user who created that replica set, like he didn't actually want to specify the pod disruption budget. But if we were to default it for him to 1, like it would get stuck for the platform, even though like the platform doesn't create such resources, right?
Agreed, which is why the thesis of this is why we should not do that. So we kind of, we were not going to go down that route and say like, if you have size 1, we'll just, yeah.
Well, then you get to scaling. Yeah. I just think this might be problematic, but like if there is a proposal, like, and considers all these options, like we can look at it.
I mean, depending on what the proposal looks like, if you have something that's more general but policy-based, you can potentially add the flexibility into it. And if it's a new API, if it's not like an extension of an existing mechanism, then the semantics aren't tied to something that the users expect today, right? The expectation can be set up front for what the behavior should be. So, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what this looks like, but I think Morten's put a lot more thought into it than the rest of us probably have at this point. So I'm kind of curious to see what he's got to say.
Yeah, so the pod disruption with just one replica, it's tricky. If you can specify defaults, that would be something you can opt into. So if you don't do anything, it'll still be like it is today. But we can. I have some thoughts on that. I can put that into a cap, and we can continue the discussion there.
Sure. Yeah. My question would be like, if it's opt-in, like it could have been just a controller outside of Cube platform, right? Like you don't really need anything except a controller that watches workload resources and creates pod disruptions budget for them. And if it's not the default, like I'm not sure if it needs to be in the core. So
yeah, there is an open source controller that does something similar to this. So that's one option. Maybe that's enough. Cool. So one other thing is about when it's safe to terminate pods, even if there is a pod disruption budget. Currently, pods are terminated without looking at the PDB if it's either in the succeeded or failed state. There is a PR out that Michael wrote that extends this to pending pods. We still see that there are situations where we can get into weird situations. It's currently, if you have like, you can have 10 pods that are crash looping and have a min available of 1. And if that happens, none of the pods can be terminated, even if it's 10 pods and we only need 1. So the question is like, what if we should look at the rules for when is it safe to terminate a pod, even if there is a PDB, especially around crash looping pods, because currently that can block draining. I think part of the difficulty here is that the rules in the disruption controller and the eviction API are slightly different. For a pod to be considered healthy by the disruption controller, it needs to be running and ready. But the rules for when it's safe to evict is it's sort of right now it needs to either be succeeded or failed. So there's a gap there. So I was interested in if you think there are better ways to do these rules.
Yeah, this is Michael Gugino. I'd like to chime in on this. So I've been working on the patch set in question, and so my point of view, I work on Cluster API, part of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, and so we're trying to add and remove nodes, completely automate it. And so this is the pending issue is something that we hit in. So basically, in that particular scenario, let's say you have 3 pods, 2 are healthy and 1 is pending, and I want to drain the node where the pending pod is. I will not be able to successfully drain that node, even though I have enough healthy replicas. So we did some back and forth. I have a couple patch sets out. We decided, well, in the case of pending, we can always pretty much delete that one because that one was never ready. It was never healthy. And all we have to do is make sure nothing has mutated the pod in the meantime by enforcing a resource version on delete. Then the other cases are things like crash loop backoff and what have you. I have a different patch out that I actually think would be a better fit for this particular case, and that is we should be able to delete any pod regardless of state as long as there are enough healthy replicas according to the pod disruption budget. But basically what we end up checking is we look for allowed disruptions, and that number automatically gets decremented if one of the pods is no longer healthy. And so you can't actually remove the unhealthy pod. So that's the other patch set. In context of ignoring pod disruption budgets and when it's appropriate, my preference would be to never ignore pod disruption budgets. We have other mechanisms in place to do that, such as you can just delete the pod. I've got a couple patch sets out to modify the drain library to skip eviction and enforce delete and things like that. But I think when you talk about removing a set of pods and trying to bake into some logic that's widely applicable to when we can ignore PDBs and when we can't, I think we might get into some edge cases and some unexpected behavior there. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, like there certainly looks like there is an error in how we delete those pods. And the issue stems from, and I think it was mentioned in the introduction, that on one side in the controller, we check the available pods actually. And when we delete them, we don't check if we delete a pod that was available or not. So we always decrement even if we are deleting the one that was down. I'm not sure if checking the pod status is the correct approach here. maybe something around checking the availability. But that seems a bit racy when I start thinking about it. I would have to think about it more. Maybe what would be helpful, like I saw this PR just now, so if you're opening a PR, just CC Kubernetes SIG Apps PR reviews, so people get notifications for it. I think this is one of those things that I would have to think for more than a few minutes.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think there's a couple of PRs out now with discussions around this, so.
Okay, great. Is that all on pod disruption budgets?
Yeah, from my side at least. I don't know if Michael maybe has some more.
I think that pretty much covers it. You know, it's just trying to enable automated remediation so there's no things blocking drain, because we still want to respect PDBs. That's the goal. But there's going to be pods in weird states, and there's a reason that we're trying to get rid of that particular node, and that's why if the rest of the PDBs are good, then we should just delete that pod, and just trying to pretty much sort out what the preferred user experience is there. But I think we covered it.
Sounds good. Okay, and then lastly, before we break off here, is I think this is a question from the release team. Were there any changes to sidecar containers that should be noted for the 117 release?
They are the ones who came back who noticed changes to sidecar containers, and I'm not familiar with the work that was done there.
I know there were some discussions about it, but this mostly falls under SIG node, not really SIG apps that much.
Okay, thank you.
So they would likely know more. I wasn't following it.
Sorry, which team does this belong to?
So podspec and containers are generally SIG node. I know that this was coupled to SIG apps as well, but I'm not sure how.
We sponsored the original KEPs. Don did become a large reviewer because ultimately it was most of the changes were in kubelet, like you're saying. So I'm trying to look for what merged.
So I pasted a link to that feature issue, the feature tracking issue. It looks like it's going to be deferred to 118.
Yeah, I didn't think we got it through. So, because I didn't see anything go into. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, according to Joseph's last message, nothing was merged before 117 code freeze. So
we're not going. It'll go 118. All right. Okay, that sounds reasonable. And then for what the person actually wanted, if they wanted to do a blog, I would feel that Joseph should be the person to write the blog post if they're interested.
yeah, that should probably wait till 118 release, I guess. Okay, well, we have 7 more minutes. We can either break early, or if anyone has anything else they'd like to bring up before then, now's the time.
Hello, this is Chris Vignola, and would like to ask a question. I work with a team that has built an open source project called the Application Navigator that makes use of the application CRD to do some various visualization and other related things. And I was wondering if this body would be interested in seeing a demo of that at some point in the future meeting. And if so, how to go about getting that on the agenda.
Very much so.
Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic. The next meeting we have is in 2 weeks, December 16th. Would that be, are you available to come then?
Yeah, that would be fine.
Great, okay. I can work with you to schedule that in then.
Alrighty. In fact, I placed a reference to it in the Google Doc that has the agenda, and so my Twitter handle is there.
Oh, I
and
see that,
also put an email address in there as well. Either means of contact would be perfectly fine.
Awesome, thanks, Chris.
Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, anything else?
This is John Terpstra. I'm going to miss the next meeting. I'll be on vacation. I look forward to catching up with everyone again in the new year.
Thanks, John. Enjoy your vacation.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, we can break 5 minutes earlier. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.